Welcome to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. On this podcast, we journey through the devastating experience of the death of a child. Grief is seldom discussed openly in our culture, and the death of a child makes people feel even more uncomfortable. We approach the topic openly and honestly, speaking to people who have lost loved ones and experts who help care for them. Whether you are a parent experiencing loss or someone who wants to support another going through this tragedy, this podcast strives to offer hope and help.
Welcome to episode 78 of Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. I'm Marcy Larson, Andy's mom. In today's episode, I talk with Sladen's mom, Kelly, from Alaska. It's actually really cool for me to speak to someone from Alaska. My mom's birthday would have been this last week, so I have been missing her. And it was always my mom and dad's dream to go on a vacation to Alaska. So other couples may have wanted to go to the Caribbean or the beach or Hawaii, but my parents always wanted to go to Alaska. I hope that someday maybe I can go visit Alaska and see Kelly, Sladen's mom. But for now, I just get to talk to her through Zoom. Please enjoy listening to Kelly talk about her amazing son, Sladen.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for coming on the show today. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time, actually.
Thank you so much for having me. I have listened in a ton, and I am very thankful to get the opportunity to talk about Sladen and just talk with you.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start talking about Sladen and introduce him to the audience, because he's a pretty amazing kid.
Yes, thank you so much. So Sladen was 19 years old, 6 weeks away from turning 20 when he was killed by an underage drunk driver, or I should say under the influence driver. And I'll first talk about him a little bit, but when he was born June 1st, 1999, and he was an absolutely beautiful baby. Just perfect all around. And many of us, think about having babies when we're older. That's all I ever wanted to do was be a mom. I never had any dreams of anything else. Just, I wanted to be a mom. I love children so much. And so when Sladen was born, I also had twin stepdaughters that were 4. And so I was already blessed with them, but so excited to have Sladen. And he was pretty much perfect. And he was a beautiful baby. He did everything early. You were a pediatrician, so you will understand this.
Yeah.
But I took him to I'll never forget taking him to his 6-month checkup. And they were so impressed with him. They said he was doing things more like a 1-year-old. He just always did things early. And for when we're talking months, that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
He was just talking. And I think at 18 months, my mom and dad came up to help with him a little bit. And I was having another baby. So they came up and he was just pointing out the window. He would say, I want to snowboard that mountain, or I snowboard that mountain and that one too. He was just super talkative, super personable. People would look at him and say, I have never had a baby look me in the eyes like that. And I mean, when he was even just a few weeks old, he would just look you in the eye and like he was trying to communicate. One thing about him when he was little, he was very persistent, which turned into, I think, motivation and determination. Mm-hmm. Pretty much anything he wanted to do, he stuck with. He was barely 2 years old, and we had little tiny ski boots and little tiny snowboard boots. And he would kick his legs and refuse to put his feet in the ski boots. He only wanted to snowboard because we snowboarded. And so that's what he wanted to do, which is very hard for a little baby to do. I think snowboarding is a little harder than skiing, because the development in your leg muscles. But after snowboarding for a while, he decided to ski as well. And by 3, he was just doing both. coming down the mountain, having no problem. So he, another thing, like my mother, when she came up at 18 months, she almost had a heart attack. He would crawl up on the kitchen table. Well, he'd crawl up on the chair, then get on the table, lean down, kind of squatting, jump off and say, "I stick it," because he would stick the landing. And she goes running over to try and stop him. I was like, "No, he does this all the time. He's fine." So he was extremely athletic, artistic.
Yeah.
He was very, very smart. I learned early, I knew he was dyslexic because we kind of have that in our family. And I believe that gave him many gifts as well. Mm-hmm. He was just off the charts with athletically and then artistically in so many ways. Reading was his challenge, which he completely overcame. But we ended up having more children, and Sladen was kind of in the middle. Again, he had the big sisters that were twins. And then we ended up having his little brother when he was not quite 18 months old. And then 5 years later, he had a little sister. So, thinking of him, I've heard you say before, you don't want to praise one child, make them seem like they were perfect. And by no means was he, but he was just all around such an amazing kid. Mm-hmm. He was extremely protective of his little brother and sister, all of them actually. But from the beginning, the boys were just like best friends. They talked in their sleep to each other. They did everything together. And he was just there for them always. But he would also be the first one to annoy them really bad. He could pick on them. He loved to wrestle his brother and his little sister. And he would do it forever. Part of that determination, he just would do it until he would learn a certain hold or something. He just wanted to experiment on his little brother, I guess.
I love hearing about you talking about those two boys together because they so remind me of my boys and how my boys were growing up. And they were 2 years apart and just the absolute best of friends. And if Andy did something, Peter wanted to do the exact same thing. And it just was a joy to watch them together. Mm-hmm.
So Sladen came home. He had gone off to college for his first year, and he came home for Christmas. And of course,
and he's a baseball player in college, right?
Yeah. So he ended up, right out of high school, he got a scholarship to Lewis and Clark State, which is in Lewiston, Idaho. It's a 4-year college, and they don't usually even take freshmen on their baseball team, but he and another boy from Anchorage both got scholarships. And Sladen's, they were both, I think, about the same. It was almost a full ride, and he really liked it there. This school is kind of like, I would say, the military for baseball, really high up there, an amazing team, no messing around. Sladen loved it because the coaches, I mean, you run, you just have a lot of physical activity with baseball, and he loved it. And he would have stayed there. Probably he made some amazing friends there. It was, again, pretty much paid for, but the head coach left and half the team left with him. And Sladen had the opportunity to stay. They did offer him that. But that summer, he was playing for a collegiate team called the Bucks up in Alaska. There's actually a very good baseball. You wouldn't realize that kids from all over come to Alaska to play baseball in the summer. One of the top collegiate leagues. Right. You wouldn't know that, but it was perfect because he could live at home, play for them. And so one of those coaches really liked Sladen a lot and said, well, if you're not quite sure what you want to do, we have a starting spot for you in California on our baseball team. And when he first told me, I was like, oh, no, you're not going to California. Are you? It's just
Idaho's really far enough from Alaska. Yes.
Yeah. And when I thought about California, he told me where, and I'm like, kind of scared. But of course he had to make that decision. And I talked to the coach who wanted him to come down, and I talked to another boy on the Bucks. His parents were up visiting for the summer. I spoke to them, and I heard great things about it. That's inevitably what he did. He ended up going down. And, it was a great fit. It was a wonderful team, one of the top teams in California. And the coaches, the college itself, pretty amazing. 23 sports, I believe they have there. It's what he chose.
Yeah.
So that was the second year, but I'll back up. So when he went to Lewis and Clark State, well, then he ended up going. So it was 2018. So it was actually coming home for Christmas from California. So 2018. And I always got his plane ticket to where he could go to his favorite restaurant. Always made sure they were open, right? So he didn't come in at midnight. Mm-hmm. He came in early enough to go to his favorite restaurant, which is called Taco King here. It's not fast food at all, but it's pretty quick. You know, you order your food, you sit down at the table and they bring it over. So of course we went to Taco King and then straight home. And like every time before, he would put his glove down, 2 gloves, he'd put them down and then instantly take his brother to the ground, wrestling him. And so he's doing this and he looks up finally and he's like, Mom, why aren't you fussing at me? And I looked at him and I said, I've just missed it. You know, it used to get so annoying to his little brother because he would do it forever.
Yeah.
And I missed it so much. His brother misses it so much now, of course. And, you know, our whole lives have just completely changed. But that, I guess, persistentness when he was little turned into determination. And again, he was just extremely motivated, which again would just get kind of annoying for his little brother and little sister. But he had a goal with all that, I think. Yeah. It's funny. His buddy had told me a story. I had not heard this until Sladen had been killed. But one of his best buddies, they decided they were both home for the summer and they decided to go and try some martial arts. And there's a place in Anchorage that has jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. I think a few things, but those are the 2 that they were focusing on. And they would let you try like 3 sessions for free. And then after that, if you like it, you can get a membership and join. And so they had gone 3 times. I think that they were at, I believe it's some Muay Thai where it's kind of like wrestling. So they're standing around. The instructor is a black belt or the highest that you can be. And he asked if anybody wants to go against him. I guess we'd say spar. I'm not sure what we'd call that, but wrestle against him. And no one's wanting to. And Sladen says, I will. And the instructor, you know, his buddy's looking at him like, Sladen, you have been here 3 times. No. So Sladen goes against him, gets him in this crazy hold. I don't remember the name of it, but Max is telling me the story. He gets him in this hold and almost has him tapping out. And apparently the instructor was like, what in the heck? And kind of upset about it, you know, because Sladen had been 3 times, which it didn't surprise me one bit. He did everything so easily. Skateboarding, skiing, snowboarding. He just got things really fast. But I will also credit his little brother for that because he's been his guinea pig for years. So,
right.
Yeah. Oh. So I don't know, were your boys very, you know, I'm sure they love each other so much, but they could probably get on each other's nerves or...
Yeah, you know, a little bit. Andy would annoy Peter. Yeah, the older one.
Yeah.
You know, he would do things that would kind of irritate Peter. And sometimes, Peter would just kind of have enough of it. And I'd have to say, Andy, you've got to cut it out. You've got to stop.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It wasn't too often, though. For the most part, they got along pretty great all the time. It was just every once in a while, Andy would push him a little too hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it was. I mean, Sladen definitely, nobody else could pick on them, right? He would never let anybody.
Sure.
And I wouldn't even call it picking on. It's like, Sladen, that's enough. you have wrestled him enough. That's enough. Stop.
Yeah. The only time Andy ever got in trouble at school was when someone on the bus had been picking on Peter. And then Andy defended him. And then he got in trouble at school. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what happened. Vice versa, though. And Damien was the same way. You know, they're all very protective of each other. I am a single parent, and I have been for quite a while. And I think it plays into their personalities. They were so protective, and they still are to this day, just so protective of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But back when they were really little, I think Damien was in kindergarten. So Sladen, he was a year and a half apart, but 2 years older in school. And a little boy had attacked Sladen. And he kind of jumped on Sladen. I think he was hitting him in the head. It was, pretty bad. And Sladen wasn't doing anything. He was super strong. He probably could have stopped this, but he did not hit this kid back. Well, Damien ended up getting in trouble because Damien sees this. He runs over, lands on the guy and holds him down. Damien's other buddy jumps on top of him. There were 4 boys holding this boy. Like they ended up laying, and they all got in trouble. And I thought, Damien, they were all protecting someone.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Took it a little far. Yep.
Yeah, it's super close. Yeah. So I knew, I guess, pretty early on, Sladen found his love for baseball. He tried every sport out there, and he did excel in most everything pretty quickly, but he found his love in baseball. And Damien loved that too, I think, partly because at first he wanted to be, do things with his brother, but they both fell in love with the same sport. And that was always great for me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I've heard you say how you love to watch them play together some.
I know. They always were playing baseball or soccer in the backyard, or wiffle ball. They played a lot of wiffle ball.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That's even more fun.
Because, that you can do easily, just the 2 people. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And they would try to do these crazy pitches, with the wiffle balls. And
they could be silly, and have fun. Yeah.
And we had family wiffle ball. We played a lot of family wiffle ball. And actually, when we got our foster son, Valeriano, so he made our family 6 instead of 5. And one of the very first things Andy said when we found out we were getting Valeriano is he said, well, now we'll have even teams for wiffle ball.
Oh, how funny. That's a huge thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And of course, Valeriano at the time was on dialysis 3 days a week and needed a kidney transplant and all this stuff. And okay, first of all, I don't even know that he knows wiffle ball.
Right.
Secondly, he is not going to be healthy enough to play wiffle ball for a while. So.
Right. So we're not sure if he can do it right away.
Right, I know. But we had even teams. And eventually Valeriano did play a lot of wiffle ball. So that was good.
Awesome. So he healed. Yeah, I've heard you speak a lot about your family, and it is funny, those dynamics. Because you have an older daughter too, right? So older.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Damien and Sladen. So I will say that Sladen ended up loving baseball, not more than Damien, but I think Sladen took it a little more serious. Damien was just as talented, could have gone, very far, but he actually had a few college offers with some scholarships, but he was going to go down to school and play with Sladen in California, at least for the year, just because he wanted to be with his brother. And I was so excited about that because, number one, Sladen would watch after his little brother. He'd have at least a year there. And Damien had offers to 4-year colleges. He could totally make that decision, but he just wanted to be with his brother. And he was a senior 3 weeks away from graduating when Sladen was killed. Mm-hmm. So that has been a huge struggle. He has changed. It's changed all of our lives so much. But when I think about their relationship, his little sister was 13. When I think about the relationship and just that being ripped out of your life at such an early age, Damien had 3 weeks away from graduating. That's just very hard to process. But I to go back just one more time, I'll tell you one other story about Sladen in high school, just a little bit about his personality. And him being he's just willing to kind of try anything, loved sports. So I pick him up when he was a junior. I picked him up from school. He didn't have a car yet. He was 16, but he didn't have a car yet. So I picked him up from school and he hopped in the front and he said, "Mom, I'm going to try out for cheer. And I said, okay, well, who are you going to cheer for? This was totally caught me off guard. He had never done like gymnastics or any kind of cheer thing, never even mentioned it. He said, this is comp cheer, Mom. And I thought, wow, you have never tried this or whatnot. But he and a few baseball buddies.
Although going back to it, he was sticking the landings at 18 months.
This is where this comes in. This is where this comes in. So he and a few baseball buddies, one of the boys had a girlfriend on the team. There were like 25 girls, and they tried to talk these boys into joining. And so 3 boys tried out. One ended up quitting, but Sladen and another friend ended up staying on. They made it. They stayed on the team. And some of the girls were telling me, I had no idea what to expect, but some of the girls later were telling me, well, first of all, I'll say, I know this is confusing, so sorry. But first of all, I ended up going to the first competition that they had. I had heard a little bit. I wasn't sure what he did. I had no idea, what all he's doing. And it was amazing. It blew me away. He and this other boy, Cody, they were doing huge stunts. They were running, doing round off, backflip. I don't even know what all they're called, but just amazing. And, they could, they were strong. They would pick a girl up. A girl would stand right in front of him. He would throw her in the air, catch her by her feet, and then proceed to lift her with his hands. And I'm like, you have never done anything like this. And he did it. He got really good at it. So did Cody. And then he's like, I'm doing baseball. They wanted him to do more, but baseball was his major love. Right. So he stuck with it.
It's so funny when kids are talented athletes, they can so often just go from one thing to the next. It's kind of amazing.
It is very amazing. And with his motivation, he would try things over and over and over until he got it perfectly, because he was pretty much a perfectionist as well. So it bothered him if he didn't get something. So he would just try it, he'd get it, and then he'd just perfect it, So I like the fact, one of the things I like about that is he wasn't scared to try out for cheer team. His buddies were like, what are you doing? A few of them, not really picked on him, but they're like, Sladen, what do you mean you're trying out for the cheer team? It was just kind of out of left field, but he enjoyed it. He's like, I'm on a team with all these girls, number one. And number two, I get to do all these running backflips, and, he loved it. So super motivated. He got pretty good at it.
Very fun.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk about what happened to Sladen?
Yes. So April 18th. So Sladen was going to El Camino Community College in Torrance, California. And the first several months, he had actually lived in, one of his coaches his parents had a pool house. And again, I told you earlier, there were 23 teams at this school. So all these coaches would kind of work together, and they'd say, I have 2 football players that need housing. I need, this basketball player. So they help these kids find housing. Well, things were just kind of falling through at first. And so this family, the coaches, he said, hey, I've got a place for Sladen to stay, for a week until we figure this out, until we figure out where to put him. So he ended up staying in this pool house for the weekend, and then things kept falling through. It was another week. The family fell in love with him. Their grandkids would come over, and, they basically kind of became his family. They really, really took care of him. So he would stay in the pool house, but the house was full access. He'd go in and get his breakfast and whatnot. And so he did that the first several months until Christmas break. And they loved him. But by this time, he had moved in with 3 football players and another baseball player to an apartment in Torrance. And it's a pretty safe place. When we went down and met the coach, we walked around the campus, we checked out the area. I just thought how great it was. The people were amazing. He was actually pretty close to the beach. And of course, that's the first thing we went and checked out after meeting the coach. But, not a bad area. So Sladen ended up moving in after Christmas break with several other boys. And he had a skateboard. He actually had rides almost everywhere he went. He was planning on, when Damien graduated, they were going to drive their car down together for the next year. So that was the plan. And he ended up getting a skateboard so he could get around just to the store across the street, or, down the street too far. He could go to the mall. So most of the time, again, he had rides, but he really enjoyed skateboarding, and he was always very safe. He would push the button to walk across the street. He wouldn't skateboard across the street. He would carry a skateboard, just skateboarding in the areas that were safe, right? So on the sidewalk. So this particular night, Sladen had just texted me. He said, I forget, we had been talking that day. We had talked on the phone, and then we were texting a bit, because the next day, someone from his church down there was actually giving him a car to use until they were giving him a car to use until he went home. And then again, the next year he'd be bringing his car down. So I had called insurance just to try to find out, make sure who needed to insure him. Was it them or me? And so we had been talking back and forth, but he texted me and said, I'm going to the store. And he said, I'm going to Lindbergh. And I said, oh, what is that? Because I had never heard of it. And he said, I'm going to get protein powder. So later I found out he skateboarded 3 miles. He went past 2 health food stores to get to this one, because it's got the best health food powder or protein powder. And, he loved activity. He loved to skateboard. He loved to snowboard. He loved to ski, anything, not really athletic, but just physical. He loved. So him skateboarding to the store that night, he could have easily asked his roommate to give him a ride, or sometimes he drove his car, but he just wanted to get out.
He wanted to, yeah.
So he had gone 3 miles, and he walked across the street, pushed the button to actually go across the street. He was right across from the health food store. He was literally there. He pushed the button, and an underage driver came from behind, and she killed him instantly. She jumped the curb. We don't know. She was highly intoxicated. And, my world completely stopped. Yeah. It was actually 8:41 at night on a Thursday. He was just trying to go to the store to get protein powder. Yeah. It's something I will never understand, ever. Yes. Sladen never once drank alcohol in his life. He did not do drugs. This goes back to him being extremely motivated, I guess, just mentally and physically one of the strongest kids I've ever met. Just people. He made a decision to not drink and not do drugs. And that's pretty big for a kid. His second year in college, some of his friends drank. He was the one that would go and pick them up when they needed a ride. He would wake me up at 2 a.m. or sometimes midnight, and say, Mom, so-and-so needs me. I need to go get them. And it was always a safe situation. I knew who he was picking up. I knew where he was going. He was the kid who was so responsible, would not let anyone drink and drive. He was against it. And how he could go, this kid that took care of himself mentally and physically. He took care of others. He would do anything for anyone. He made these choices at a young age. He stuck to them. And then to be killed by a drunk driver, it's just one of those things that I will never understand. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah, we've talked about that. Yeah, and when it is so negligent on that other person's part, it's similar to our situation where, we're in a construction zone, first of all, so that traffic should have been slow anyway. And then we're in an exit lane to go to a baseball game, which, my boys loved baseball too. So we were going to see baseball. So we were just in an exit lane in a construction zone. No one had any business traveling over. I mean, we were going maybe 15 mile an hour in the exit lane. The construction zone, I'm sure they shouldn't have been going more than about 50, maybe 45 even, given the amount of traffic and the fact that there's construction. And then to have this woman come out of nowhere and hit us at 65 mile an hour is insanity, right? Especially since she was also going to the baseball game. I mean, she was going to the baseball game. No way you should have been in an exit lane going that fast. It was craziness. And that's what's so difficult, I think, when it's so obviously negligent. Like, you absolutely were 100% doing the wrong thing. Now, she did test negative for drugs. She tested negative for alcohol. They took her phone. She wasn't on the phone. I have no idea what she was doing.
Which is so hard too, that not knowing. Yeah, right.
And that drives me crazy.
Right.
It's so hard to, like, what in the heck were you doing? What were you looking down or up, or clearly not at the road for that long to have all of this? I mean, this did not suddenly come upon you. I mean, I know you could see traffic from a long ways back. So I have no idea what she was doing, and that really can make you angry. And I know that when we had that previous conversation too, it was like, what the heck was she doing? What was she thinking? What was, she jumped the curb. I mean, it's just so infuriating. Really.
I know. So we talked a little bit earlier. I think it's important that we are all so different, and that that's okay in our grief, our anger, all of this. I can't compare my situation to yours, but they're very similar too. I know that some people handle it completely different. None of us win, right? None of us win. The people who lose their children to cancer, I can't imagine watching them suffer, or to suicide. I can't imagine what those parents must feel like, but none of us win. This is such a hard thing. I can't say that it would be easier for any of those, because obviously those are just horribly tragic. But when you have a kid like your son, and then, so Andy is in the car. He's a great kid. He's doing absolutely nothing wrong, and his life is taken from him in a second. That is the part that I would never change. I couldn't change it, because I don't want to see Sladen suffering from cancer. I don't know why he died this way, but he was doing everything right.
Right.
And to have someone doing everything wrong come and take their life, it just, I think there's a layer of anger. I have someone I can blame. So I have to figure out how I'm going to process that. And
yeah, because it's hard living with that anger. It is really difficult. I've talked to you about this, and I've talked about this on the show, that for my husband, he was never angry with her. Never. Not even that day. And I could never understand it. And in fact, it was a little bit of a point of a kind of a friction kind of point with us, because I was a little bit mad at him for not being mad. Like, I didn't want to talk about the fact that he wasn't angry, because I couldn't understand how he wasn't angry.
Oh, I bet that's so hard.
And I really didn't want to be angry with him. I didn't, but it just was so different. Our feelings were so different, and the way he could forgive immediately was difficult for me. And it just goes to show how our grieving is so unique. And I mean, in some ways, I'm sort of jealous of him that he was able to do it right away. But on the other hand, I know going back, I couldn't. I had to absolutely work through that anger. I had to feel it. I had to feel it and live it and get through it. It took a lot of processing, and I needed it. I needed to have that and get through it. And I couldn't have just skipped that step. I mean, Eric didn't need to deal with it and has been fine. He would get angry over other reasons. He too, like you had mentioned, he too would be angry that Andy was doing nothing, and like
yeah, absolutely.
He felt like Andy got robbed, right? I mean,
he had his life robbed.
Just sitting in the back of the car with his seatbelt on, talking about how he's going to read The Lord of the Rings, and next thing you know, he's dead. I mean, that he got angry over a little bit, the situation, but never at a person.
I know you've probably heard this, grief is, they say there's stages, and, you're grieving in so many different ways. And anger is one of those stages. For me, it is not, it isn't like that. I can't seem to get past this complete sadness, I don't ever want to get over losing Sladen. And I think forgiveness, I have to define what that means for me. I rarely thought about the girl for the first 6 months. And I had even gone to court and she would not look at me. I had never once seen this girl's face. And finally, when I was talking to another mother who had been through something very similar, I decided to look the girl up that night. I looked at her face and I almost, I started trying to figure out things about her. And then I realized, I feel like for me, I try not to think about her. Although I go through stages of thinking about her. Uh-huh. Yes, I am angry. I feel like I have a lot to be angry about. It's not very cut and dry for me. I cannot just say, I just don't understand how people can say, I forgive you. To me, that means saying that I'm okay with it. And I'll never be okay with my son dying for any reason, but I'll never be okay with it. I will never be okay with Sladen's death. I think my way of forgiveness is trying to just not, I don't want to be vengeful, but I want justice. So there's that figuring it out is very hard for me. What does forgiveness mean for me? What is it really supposed to mean? I can't turn it on and off. I can't do that because I'm human. So.
Yeah. Well, I think back to early on for me. So it's very interesting the way we found out who it was. So we were able to go to find our van to get things out of the van. And I wanted to go. At first, Eric and my friend Michelle did not want me to go, did not want me to see it, but I felt like I had to see it. So they allowed us to go back where it was being held. And it wasn't at a police station. It was at this place where they had to hold the cars. And actually, our van was there for, I think, a year and a half. It had to be there until all of the court stuff was settled. They were not allowed to get rid of it. So it was sitting in this building. And I went and looked at it. And of course, it's horrible. It's horrible to see that. You see Andy's blood. It was horrific, but I felt like I needed to do it. Well, we did not realize this, but we get there and the car that hit us is there too. So the car that hit us is right ahead of us. And she had a vanity plate. She had a white BMW with a vanity plate. Now, I don't even remember what it was, but I wouldn't say it anyway, even if I did. And yeah, so she had this vanity plate, and I looked, of course, at her car, and I just got angry. Every time I saw a white BMW, I would get furious. I mean, I just couldn't even handle seeing that car. And so because she had a vanity plate, we looked it up.
Right.
My friend and I, you can look up a vanity plate and find out who it is. So then what do? I start Facebook stalking this woman. And I see her and she's on and I don't know, she had new glasses or something that she had been showing off. And she stopped posting. I think her last post was the day before the accident or something like that. But they had all these ones of her traveling and all this. And I just felt myself getting more and more angry and angry and angry.
You might have had to do it.
But I mean, it was so not healthy for me to do this. And then eventually you can tell she got an attorney because she turned off all of her social media. Everything was turned off. I think after she got an attorney that said, you need to shut everything down. So that's what she ended up doing. But it just like eats at you. And I just found out. Like, I would just look at her and I would see pictures of her and, other countries and all this travel. And it just, I don't know. You just think
that's anger. That makes you angry.
My son will never get to do that. It was anger. It was a lot of anger. And it took a really, really long time for me. And I remember saying when we were in the midst of all the court stuff, I said to Eric, I just need her to be sorry. I just wanted her to be sorry. Like, because I tried looking at her in court. She would not look at me. She would not make eye contact with me.
Yes.
You know, she just walked by in her high heels and whatever. And I just got all like more mad. And it's so funny because I got it as she's walking by me in her high heels and refusing to make eye contact with me, like it was some sort of uppity thing or something. I don't know what I was thinking. But my husband was like, oh man, she looks so scared. And I thought, I can't believe we're in the same courtroom looking at the same woman, and you thought of her as scared, and I thought of her as uncaring and...
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny how you read people?
Aloof. And it just goes to show how your emotions are. That's really what's happening. And it was like my anger and what my anger made me see her as, and what Eric's real lack of anger made her, you know, when he looked at her, he saw something entirely different.
You know,
I don't think he ever Facebook stalked her. It was my girlfriends and I that were doing that. You know, I mean,
yeah, it's funny because just the different, I feel like that's huge that we know we all need to handle it the way we need to handle it. I didn't for so long. And when I finally looked at her, I was angry too, because like you, going through a civil and then going through a criminal process, it's very hard. There was a sentencing. To hear people defend her or say things, that was extremely hard for me. I felt that she had really good, let's see how I put this. I feel like she had really good civil advice, but her moral advice was just horrible.
Well, and I think that is what happens. So, you know, early on, we went to, I think it was our second court date, and we weren't allowed to go in, but the prosecutor went in, and we were just in this other little room, and then the prosecutor came out and talked to us, and he said, well, is there any way that Andy didn't have his seatbelt on or had his head out the window? Because the attorney apparently had said maybe he didn't even have his seatbelt on, or maybe he had his head out the window, because of course Eric had unbuckled his seatbelt and taken him out of the car before the police ever arrived. And some other bystander who was a medic, he was an Army medic, I guess, he was trying to get the door open. So I don't know if they did something with the window. I'm not sure. But they were trying to get him out. He ended up having to go out through the driver's door because there was no other door he could get out of. I mean, even Peter, when he crawled out the driver's door. He crawled all the way out of the car on his own. That stuff was the kind of stuff that was coming from the attorney. And then what do? You end up putting it on the person, right? I mean, I put it on like that came from her. And then I was mad. Like that day to the prosecutor, I was like, no, I'm a pediatrician. My kids never were without a seatbelt, ever. There's no way. And then I was like, she want to go to court? Let's go to court. Like, let me talk to a jury. But it wasn't really ever coming from her. It's just that's what they do. And this whole court process just took forever and ever and ever. And it turns out, by the time we got to the end, I find out she's been horribly depressed. She became suicidal. She was in a mental hospital because of the tremendous guilt. When she spoke to us that sentencing day, she said, I have trouble looking at my own son because I think about yours. She was in horrible pain, but the court system did not let her. And she said, I could never contact you. No one would let me contact you. And I'm so sorry. She felt horrible, but all the attorneys and all the advice that she would get would be like, you can't talk to them because then you're saying that you're guilty and we don't want you to go to jail and we don't want this and we don't want them to sue you for
it's really hard though,
everything you're worth and whatever, like, right? So she had to keep her mouth shut, but in fact, all it did for me is make me more angry. Had she reached out to me earlier, I would have been less likely to want jail time or any of that stuff, which it ended up, she didn't get jail time. And we did have a civil thing with her insurance company, but we never personally took her to court. And that's because I had to do some work on my own with my own anger. I think by the time it got around to that, I was beginning to come to this realization that the anger was a poison to me. And so all of that anger that I was feeling and trying to direct towards her was only poisoning my own life. It wasn't really doing anything to her anyway. So that was the big thing. So that's why I think for me, letting go of the anger was so important, because it only affected me negatively and my life negatively. My anger did nothing to make her life worse or better or anything. So that was like an amazing revelation to me. And I hope that that's something that you will be able to kind of come around to as well. But I think you can't have someone tell you to do it. You just have to get there on your own. Like, no matter what Eric said to me, he wasn't going to get me to let go of it before I was ready to let go of it.
No, you can't. Again, we can't compare ourselves, but we are only human. I know. I pray every day for peace. I pray every day for just to let me be the best mom that I can be. I love my children. That is what I am. I feel like I'm here for, is my family, my children. I put my children first. I always have, before anything else. And, I will mourn and cry. I will cry every day for the rest of my life. And I don't want that to go away in a way. And I don't mean that in a horrible, I don't want to be miserable, but I am. I know that I can find joy and that I can grieve in the same moment. I love my children so much, and I would do absolutely anything for them. And I know, I've got to continue and be the best mom that I can be. But the anger, I guess, for me, I don't even know if it's anger or just, the girl was not remorseful. The family wasn't remorseful. I saw self-pity at the end. At first, I saw nothing. The choices that they made, and the girl was almost 17, so she's young, but at 17, you know better. It's really hard because I don't want to be vengeful, but I do want justice. But I don't know what that means. What does that mean? The worst that she could have faced was a 7 to 9 month camp.
I know.
That's the worst that they could have given her. And I can just say that they didn't give her the full sentence. So it's hard.
Yeah. And it's so hard too, because it was so, being intoxicated, jumping the curb, all of that. It's just so much. It's not like,
no, not at all.
He was in the crosswalk and she was blinded by the sun and didn't see him. There were a lot of things done really, really wrong. I remember my brother-in-law, he was really angry and he really wanted there to be jail time for the woman and that hit us. And he had a hard time even using the term accident.
You can't say accident in some situations.
When you think of an accident, it infers that no one's really at fault. It just sort of happened. But when it's clearly not that way, then it absolutely 100% should never have happened. Cars are never supposed to be on the sidewalk. They're never supposed to go on the curb. There's no reason for that.
Whatever you're doing, accidents would be if someone had a heart attack or, I don't know. I think it is hard for you probably not knowing why this lady was doing this. I do know what the girl did. I know she did some things wrong. It doesn't make it easier, I would say, but at least I know. I don't know everything actually, because they won't say everything. Her being a juvenile, it makes it really difficult. But yeah, it's not an accident. I don't think that it was deliberately targeting my son or your son, but they still did something wrong.
No,
and it could have been different. It's senseless, completely senseless. It didn't have to happen, and that's not an accident.
That's a perfect word for it, actually. It's just senseless.
Completely. Just 100% senseless. And I think probably one of the hardest things that I've come to learn now is there was a boy who actually offered her a ride home, but he didn't stick with it. He didn't persist. He let her go. And that was Sladen's last chance. It's not cut and dry. There's just so many things. And I feel like grief is so messy. It is just deep and dark and so messy. And maybe the reason I can't get past certain things yet is I'm an organizer. I organize for people. And in my mind, this is not organized. Mm-hmm. I can't finish I can't get over one part and move to the next. That is not the way grief works. And I think that makes it even harder for me. Yeah. Because I have to have things organized. I always have. Mm-hmm. And this is just not, grief is bad. Grief is messy. There is no finish to it. We'll never get over these things. So.
Yeah. And I think too, I talked about this recently on an episode, which I don't think you've listened to yet. There was one that we talked about guilt, and a woman had said it is much easier to feel guilt than to feel powerlessness. And I think I've thought about that so much, about how hard it is to feel completely powerless in a situation. I've actually taken it over to talk to some of my teens who are suffering from a lot of anxiety with the pandemic about just that feeling of being completely powerless and how difficult that is, and how so many other feelings end up, you feel that instead, because to feel powerless seems unacceptable. So you feel anger because, as opposed to, if you didn't feel angry, you would be feeling this powerlessness. And like, who wants to feel powerless? You want to think that you have more control than you do. Like, I have got at least a little bit of control in this situation. And to admit you had nothing, no control, is so difficult. And when I think about how many things you had no power over, you are in Alaska and he is in Southern California. So you have no control over any part of his life. You had no control over whether he took the skateboard that day as opposed to borrowing a car. You have no control over that kid offering her a ride. All of that kinds of stuff. You just had no power. It goes to the court process. You have no power in that. That is so challenging. And it was a huge revelation to me just to think about that in many situations, about how admitting to myself situations where I just don't have power. And that's a lot of what's going on.
And you know what we can't do? You and I, neither one of us can fix this for our other children. And that is the hardest thing. Losing Sladen is obviously the hardest thing I have ever gone through. But watching my other children suffer his loss is excruciating. I cannot fix it for them. And we're going to make it. We're going to be okay, but not really okay. We will never get over the loss of Sladen ever. We will never be the same. And as a mom, I can't fix that for my children. It's horrible.
I think back to our conversation that we had months ago when we talked on the phone about how, Peter and Andy played a lot of sports in the backyard together. And Peter has not really done it since. And I know that you have that same situation with baseball and Damien, because you said earlier in the episode that Damien was planning on going down to California to play baseball with his brother.
Yeah. And I was so excited because Miley would be my last one in the house. And I had just gotten to a point where, you know what, we can travel down and see the boys together. I was just so excited about them being together, and we could go and visit them in college together, watch them play baseball, or just go to the beach. Sladen loved the beach. That was one of the things he loved about California. And we had these dreams. He had these dreams. His brother had these dreams, and they've stopped. Those dreams are no longer, they'll never be able to live out those dreams because he was ripped out of our life. And it is hard.
And Damien has not played baseball, right? He
had coaches that called him and said, we know you and your brother, we will take you here. And the team down there was amazing. They said, we'll take care of you. You can still come here. It was up to him, and he couldn't do it. He made the decision. Of course, he couldn't go down there. It would have been very hard for him to walk in the same locker room, the field. Yeah. But other coaches reached out to him, and he just made the decision to stay in Alaska, go to the University of Anchorage in Alaska. I think he thought he needed to be near us. And it's really hard because my daughter was 13. when Sladen was killed. Damien was 18, about to graduate college or high school, go off to college. And, you're grieving so hard that, I made the decision right away, really early on. I was not going to be the mom who just sat in the rocking chair and rocked back and forth thinking about Sladen all day long. I think about him all day. Right. I'm having a conversation with someone and I'm always thinking about Sladen. There's that yuckiness in your tummy. You always have your child. It doesn't go away. But I made the decision to, go to every game. The only game I missed, because Damien was in his high school season, the only game I missed was on the day that Sladen was buried. And Damien went to sit in his dugout. They changed the time of the game, so it was later in the day. All the boys, the whole team was at Sladen service. But that's the only game I missed. Looking back, I went to every game. I did all these things. I probably looked like a monster. I know that people were so worried about me but I went. I don't know what I looked like, but I realized it when I walked around the corner one day and I find my little girl sitting on the front porch. And she had been crying and she was trying to wipe her tears. And I was telling her, I've always been very open, we need to talk about things in life. But since this had happened, I said, we all grieve differently. We can talk about Sladen, are you okay? I sat down and started talking to her and she said, I said, it's okay to cry, cry right now. Let's talk about it. And she said, I just don't want to upset you and Damien. And it hit me that what do we look like to her? We were both, I wouldn't call it depressed because when you're grieving, it's not depression, it's grief. But I remember maybe 3 or 4 months after Sladen was killed, the first time I smiled. That's huge. To a little girl, she was 13, trying to hold it together for her big brother and her mom because she didn't want to, make it worse for us. It just is a horrible thing to go through. But
yeah, that's what we do. I think as families, we try to protect each other and do the best we can to protect each other. And actually, it'll be a nice little segue. In just a couple of weeks, I will be doing an episode with Gwen on sibling loss and grieving as a family and what that looks like. Because I've had a lot of people ask me about that recently. So that will be great.
Sibling loss
is horrible.
Just horrible, and I don't think get noticed as much. I know people are always saying, how's your mom? How's your, but
that's what they do. They always say, how's your mom? Even though they're going through a horrific pain.
They're they have these little stories and little things that only they can remember, that partner in crime and that sibling bond broken like that and being ripped out of their life. It's huge. And I don't think people realize it enough. So I will be listening in to you and Gwen because I'm learning. I want to talk about Sladen all the time.
Yeah.
But I know that one of the older girls, one of the twins is really quiet. She likes to talk about it, but she would never say things in public. The other one has been able to talk and wants to communicate more, do things. His younger brother is extremely private and quiet. We can talk about it, but he's not going to talk about it in front of a lot of people, so they're all different. And I would love to hear what Gwen says because my goal now is to be the best mom. It's always been that way, but to children that have lost a sibling.
Absolutely.
That's something that I have to learn.
Well, thank you so much for sharing Sladen with us today and being on the show. I just really love talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcy.
Thanks for listening to Losing a Child, Always Andy's Mom. Please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. We are always looking for new show ideas. If you'd like to be a guest, know someone who'd be a great guest, or have a show idea, please email us at marcy@andysmom.com. Be sure to visit the webpage, andysmom.com, for more content, including Marcy's blog. There you can also sign up to receive updates via email. Together, let's work to inspire hope, one day at a time.